In March 2020, as the world went into lockdown, Robert Bertie Howells made a desperate choice. Homeless, jobless, and with nowhere to turn, he accepted a stranger's offer to escape to a remote farmhouse in Wales, armed with nothing but a rucksack and the hope of starting over. Bertie had no idea he was walking into a carefully orchestrated nightmare, one that would leave him forever marked by symbols carved into his own flesh. This is Bertie's psychiatric confession of what really happened at Nusquam, the nowhere place that feeds on human despair, and why some of rural Wales remains unsearched by authorities. I grew up in a seaside town in North Wales called Llandudno. During the summer, the promenade was bursting with life, Punch and Judy puppet shows and boat trips beneath the great arm, that salty sea breeze that seemed to make everything seem just right. But during the winter, that town felt different. The coldness was sharp and unforgiving, and the shine of the summer seemed a world away. In these months, as COVID threatened to change everything, my life fell apart. My girlfriend found someone else, leaving me homeless. I also lost my job as her new boyfriend turned out to be my boss's brother. Small town problems. Everyone was connected to everyone else. I'd been staying at a friend's, but his wife's snide comments made it obvious that I'd outstayed my welcome. It wasn't great timing, as the news reported of COVID spreading like wildfire and lockdown being imminent. I could feel the change in the air. Something big was brewing. The world was headed for something crazy, and while the rest of the country faced the reality of not being able to leave their homes, I faced the terrifying reality not having a home to begin with. I was sitting on the rocky beach, which back when I was a kid used to be an endless span of gold, and I cried into my hands, tears that caught into the fierce wind and blew back into my face. Some people walked past me, did a double take, and then came back over. I thought they were coming to laugh at the crying loser, and I was about to cough to scare them off, when I heard one of them say my name. It was Grant. He's a guy I'd gone to school with, but I hadn't spoken to in years. I wiped my hands on my sleeve and I sniffed as I nodded at him in recollection. "World's gone to shit, ain't it?" He laughed. "Geez, Bertie, you look terrible. Not your day, huh?" "Not my anything," I muttered, forcing back tears. Grant sat down next to me, his friend Callie lingering behind us. He started talking to me about how his life had gone to shit, too. He and Callie were getting out of there before they were locked down in their hellish homes. He'd been offered an opportunity in South Wales. He didn't say the ins and the outs of it. He just said that they were leaving in the next few days and that where they were going, lockdown rules didn't apply. He looked back at Callie, patted me on the shoulder, and then asked me if I wanted to come too. What was the alternative? Face being locked down when I lived nowhere. So I told Grant I wanted to go with them. I gave him my number and he said that he'd message me the details. They walked off and I stayed there, shuddering in the cold. It's not like I had anywhere else to go. A part of me believed Grant was humoring me and I'd never hear from him again. I often think about what would have happened to me if this were the case. Would I have ended up locked down in a hotel room that I couldn't afford, or stuck in my friend's freezing cold garage hearing his wife yell at him through the connected wall? Back then I thought these were the worst scenarios. Yeah, turns out I was wrong. A day later, on the day that the lockdown was announced, Grant messaged me saying that they were setting off that night. He picked me up outside of the Grand Hotel at 11:55 p.m. There was an eerie silence as we left Llandudno and traveled into the night. I napped in the back. When I opened my eyes, we were in South Wales, driving through the endless rolling green countryside. Callie was driving. They must have switched over at some point during the night. See, it was still dark outside, but the sky was softening into a tone of charcoal gray. They were whispering to each other, words I couldn't hear. So feeling like the odd one out, I distracted myself by staring out the window and trying to spot a rogue black sheep among the mass of white. I didn't see any, but I did see lambs, a sign that nature did as it pleased, even during what felt like an apocalypse. I blinked my eyes, and when I looked again, the sheep had gone, all of them, gone. I looked at the blank of green beyond the low stone walls, and I wanted to ask Grant and Callie where the sheep were and how far there was to go, but they were still whispering to each other. I did a double take. Grant was driving again. I don't remember them stopping to change over. We didn't pass any of the other cars from the sheepless point. We didn't pass much of anything. It felt like we stepped into a new reality, one that I felt unsure of. My concerns heightened when we drove past this faded red gate that led up a narrow lane. Next to it was a rock with a dripped red word on it. Nusquam. The farmhouse is up there, that's where the opportunity is, Grant said, pointing up the lane, the true extent of it hidden beneath a line of trees. Then why aren't we going there? I asked in confusion. We have to stay somewhere else first, 7 days, and then we'll be ready. He turned to Callie, the pair exchanging this look. So we have to isolate first. It's because of COVID, right? I replied. As I spoke, I noticed Callie itch beneath his jacket sleeve where I saw the flash of this vivid tattoo, a snake coiled around a skull. And when he saw me looking at it, Callie glared at me and quickly pulled down his sleeve. I chose to daydream after that, to do my best to escape the weirdness around me. But then the car stopped by a thatched cottage. The old stones were crawling with yellowing green vines. I looked at the faded tree slice sign, noting the name, Ivy Cottage. Grant found the key under a cracked plant pot containing a collection of unruly weeds. I followed them inside, all three of us with just a rucksack each. Inside was dark and gloomy. The patterned damp walls smelled musky, and it was colder there than outside. The other guys took the bedrooms and I took the couch. It was more springs than comfort, but I told myself at least it was something. As for supplies, we found a box in the kitchen full of unlabeled tins and water. Again, it was something. Seeing as we weren't able to leave the cottage for a week, we did our best to entertain ourselves. I lost count of how many games of poker and rummy we played. Callie won more often than not. He was smarter than he looked. One night we shared the bottle of whiskey that Grant had brought with him. We chatted about the gripes of life. I woke up with a thudding headache and I drank a half a bottle of water. Silence returned after that, and we all kept to ourselves. On the last night there, I couldn't sleep, so I listened to songs I'd saved on my phone. Blinding Lights by The Weeknd, blaring in my ears. I was smoking one of my ration cigarettes, savoring that lingering smell and hoping one of the others didn't come in and try to bum one, when a shadow flickered past the curtainless window. I kept my earphones in as I walked over to it, telling myself that it was probably just a fox. I stared through the dirty window out at the trees beyond it. I don't know why I remained still like that, I just did. I think I knew something was going to happen, but this didn't make it any easier when it did. A woman shot up like a jack-in-the-box. Her bloody hands were out right as she pressed them to the window. I didn't scream or jump or anything. I looked at her, terrified but rigid, as I watched her grin at me. A gap-toothed, bloody-mouthed grin. As she pulled back her hands, leaving smudged handprints on the glass, I noticed 2 carved images on her palms, a snake on one and a skull on the other. When she saw me looking at them, she rubbed her hands together as though she was connecting the two. Then she turned around and she walked off into the trees. I stared at that bloody handprint so that I knew it was real until I couldn't stare at it anymore. I went back to the couch and I closed my eyes. I couldn't call for help. There was no reception and we couldn't leave the cottage, not until tomorrow. Grant had made that very clear. I set the song to repeat and I tried to get some sleep. What I saw should have disturbed me more than it did, but it was just that place. I think it was starting to get inside my head and change things. The next morning, Callie shook me awake and told me it was time to leave. My phone was dead and the silence made me remember last night and that woman. My eyes darted over to the window and the smudged red handprints that were still there. Callie followed my gaze and saw them too, but he just sighed. He told me to get a move on. I gathered up my things, but then as I grabbed my jacket that I'd flung on the floor by the wall, I noticed the peeling wallpaper and lifted it, revealing a message written in red beneath it. Nusquam is nowhere. This place just got weirder. I lowered the wallpaper, hiding the cryptic message beneath it, and I hurried out of there. See, I naively thought the farmhouse would hold some answers. Instead, as we drove up that narrow lane lined with trees and barbed wire, and I noticed the clumps of hair and clothes and something else mangled in that fence, I slumped further into my seat and I swallowed in dread. I told myself I was imagining things. I knew I wasn't. There was no turning back now. My fear loneliness had led me to this path. Twisted weeds seemed to sprout out of the farmhouse's bricked foundations. It looked like one wrong movement would cause it to tumble in on itself. Next to it were several barns that looked similar in condition to the house. There were some wheelbarrows in the courtyard with canvas covers over them. No other vehicles but ours, and no people. Callie gestured for me to get out of the car. Grant drove off toward one of the barns, and I followed Callie into another one. The graffiti on the door, it said Rot Zone. A smell hit me first. This rancid, decaying smell that caused me to dry heave. There was about a dozen bunk beds in the large, high-ceilinged space and more mattresses on the floor, all stained beyond recognition. There were a few people in there. A woman was on one of the top bunks humming to herself, and a few more people were scattered around. It was only as I followed Callie further into the room and around the corner that the smell seemed to worsen. Lying on a mattress in the corner was a man, or at least what was left of him. His right arm was missing. Bloody fabric was hanging from the place it used to be. His right leg was dislodged at the knee. His fleshy tendons were visible beneath the torn fabric of his jeans. Bad luck, man, Callie nodded at him. The man, through my disbelief, just chuckled and then replied, "The game got me this time. Never mind, huh? Nusquam is nowhere." I don't know why I accepted this, just as I don't know why that mangled man who was alive by a thread seemed to accept it too. There was that word again, Nusquam. Seemed to haunt me around this godforsaken place. Callie climbed up to a top bunk and I sat on that filthy mattress underneath. Hours later, two bloody people came into that barn, a man and a woman. The man was limping and laughing, barbed wire coiled around his leg and waist like a snake. The woman's clothes were torn and bloody, but at first glance she seemed unharmed. And then she looked at me, grinned, a bloody mouth, gap-toothed grin. She lifted her scarred palms. My heart jolted as reality hit me. She had been real all along, that woman from the cottage window. I curled up on the rancid bed, covering my ears with my hands, trying to pretend that I was back at that rocky Landino beach. Pretending the wind was blowing into my tearful face, as this time I made a different choice. The next morning, Callie passed me a slice of moldy bread and sat on the mattress as he devoured his slice. Grant wasn't there. He never shown up. We didn't talk about Grant. We didn't share any words. He gave a nod in my direction and left with the others, and then I was alone with the two men who were too injured to move. I fetched them water from a murky trough and passed the one with barbed wire, now a part of his flesh, my slice of moldy bread. He took it from me with shaky hands, stared at it, laughed until he could do so no more. Then he fell face forward and died. The other man, who was more mangled than limbs, remained alive. I don't know how. The barn was locked from the outside. I checked, but I knew it was not my time to leave. That evening, the woman and some of the others returned, twisted and torn, but Callie wasn't one of them. The days passed by, but each morning I chose to stay with the festering people who clung on to the last grips of life. On the 7th morning of being in that barn, a woman with the scarred palms came over to my bed and held out her hand to me. I took it and I let her lead me toward the open barn door, ready, at last, to play this game, to seal my fate. The outside world was too bright, so dazzling, in fact, it didn't feel real. I followed the woman onto the back of a trailer being driven by an old man. I didn't see him clearly, not even when he stopped in the middle of a field and unloaded us like cattle. The group disappeared, rushing off in different directions. I hesitated, taking in the yellow, dying patch of grass beneath my feet. "I hope you managed to stay alive. I like you, Bertie. I always have," the old man cackled behind me. I didn't question what he meant by that. I didn't question anything anymore. Instead, I did what the others had done. I ran. I ran across the patchy grass, even when it seemed to grab at my feet to try and swallow me whole. When I heard screams and human howls close by, I ran toward the sounds. I saw the trail of blood, and I followed that too. It stopped by a hole in the ground. I lay on my stomach, and I peered into it. I saw Callie in there. mangled and twisted in some sort of mechanical fly trap. He squirmed beneath it. He was still alive. He looked at me, eyes glazed over, and muttered, "Sorry, mate. Nusquam's nowhere." I stayed there next to him until he closed his eyes. As night fell, I heard a hum in the air, and I followed the bloody trail back across the field. The trailer was there, waiting for us. Only that woman and I got into it. She laughed on the journey back to the barn, but I didn't say a word. That torment continued for the next week, torment of my own making. New people arrived, but they never left. Each morning I wandered that field and past the trees. I avoided traps and holes. I walked past a human scarecrow, grotesquely alive and unflinching. I clung on to barbed wire until I could no longer feel it slice through my flesh. I almost forgot there was more to the world than this. I was nowhere. Nowhere was all-consuming. I went back to the barn and I curled up onto the mattress, ignoring the insects that crawled over me. I dared to lift one once. A cockroach? The word Nusquam was carved into its underbelly. I don't know why this night felt different, but it was. I checked the barn door, noticing it was unlocked. I wandered over to the farmhouse. The door was hanging on its hinges. I managed to step around it and go inside. I shouldn't have been able to stand the stench of death. Rotten corpses laying at my feet, bones fixed to the walls and ceiling with dirt. I didn't even blink. I kept on walking, stepping over severed arms, spotting a skull and snake tattoo on the inner elbow. The main room was full of piles of debris. Flies swarmed it and rats scurried past me. In the center, sitting on top of the skeletal remains, was a man I knew, but I struggled to recognize. It was Grant. But any signs of humanity had vanished from his eyes. He laughed when he saw me, his grip firm on the creaking wooden chair. At his feet I saw a skull, something slithered inside of it. A snake, its true color unknown in the dull light. I mouthed to him, "Why?" The room seemed to creak as he shook his head and he said, "Nusquam is nowhere." He started to whistle. The first whistling I'd heard while being in this place, but sounded like it had always been. It mesmerized me at first, but then it seemed to stop. With silence to guide me, I turned and I left. Outside of the farmhouse, the world seemed brighter. And for the first time, and I don't know how long, my head seemed to clear. I saw the crate of whiskey there next to the door, the same brand Grant had brought with him to this place. I saw a car, boxy red and rusty, behind me in the courtyard, and I knew it was meant for me. I picked up that bottle, I unscrewed the lid, and I took a large swig. I coughed, and then I laughed. I poured it over my swollen, infected hand and embraced the pain. I felt real again. I knew what I had to do. I doused the outside of the building in a bottle of whiskey. I opened another, and then I poured it inside. I smashed the rest of the bottles in the entrance, and then I felt inside my pockets, my good hand curling around my lighter. I lit that hellhole on fire, and I watched it burn. A crow perched on top of the car. It watched it burning too, the crimson and gold flames reflected in its visible beady eye. As it flew away, I got into the car and somehow managed to get away. I drove for hours without seeing a soul, not even a sheep. I wept when I saw one that turned into hundreds. I was out of that place, truly. But to be sure, I drove straight through the next town I saw and stopped at the one after that. In the trunk of my car, I found hundreds of wallets, empty of identity and bank cards, but stuffed full of cash. I picked up one bill stapled to the trunk's interior, and on it was a red-stained snake coiled around the skull. I left that note where it was, but I took the rest. I told myself it'd be different now. I'd won. I could start again. I hadn't won at all. There's no running away from the truth. It would always find me. Always. After all, Nusquam is nowhere. In the summer of 2022, as the rest of the world began to return to some sort of normality after the pandemic, Robert Bertie Howells admitted himself into a psychiatric unit. During trance-like states, he had self-mutilated himself by carving symbols of snakes coiled through a skull into his skin. Bertie had hired a security guard to watch him while he slept to prevent him from hurting himself again. Despite being a man of slim build and having limited use in one hand, he attacked that guard and partly carved the same symbol into the man's neck before he was overpowered. The guard claims Bertie showed signs of unnatural strength and at the time of the attack seemed to be unaware of his actions. There have been 2 other accounts reported about Nusquam, the nowhere place. Ellis Powell in 1983 and Ashley Taylor in 2009. Both claim to have suffered horrific ordeals at Ivy Cottage and the farmhouse. Both self-mutilated their skin with a snake coiled through the skull symbol, and both disappeared without a trace. Bertie maintains he saw what he saw and that Nusquam may have burned to the ground, but is still out there somewhere. An evil in a nowhere place that lives on in those who felt it. That lives on in him. Despite extensive searches by authorities throughout rural South Wales, the location of the farmhouse and Ivy Cottage remain unfound. Thank you for staying with Bertie's story to the end. It always blows my mind that only 40% of my viewers are subscribed. If you made it this far, you're clearly one of us who values these tales. What would you have done in Bertie's situation? When desperation meets opportunity, how do you tell the difference between rescue and a trap? Share your thoughts below. If you'd like to join our circle for more stories like this, please subscribe and consider becoming a member today. You get 2 videos every week early, plus more exclusive content. And share this tale in a world full of nowhere places. We find each other through the stories that we pass along. Until next time, stay curious. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.